The throne room of Varanor blazed with 1,000 torches. Seren pressed her spine against the cold marble pillar, her fingers trembling where they gripped the rough stone. She should not be here. Every rational thought screamed at her to retreat to the hidden passage behind the tapestries, to return to the safety of shadows where a healer of common blood belonged. But she could not make herself leave. Not when Corvin stood on the dais at the far end of the hall, his powerful frame wrapped in ceremonial black and crimson. Not when his voice had summoned every noble house in the kingdom to witness what he had promised would be the most important announcement of his reign. Tonight, he had sworn to her in the darkness of his chambers, fingers tangled in her hair, lips brushing the secret mark he had bitten into the curve of her shoulder. Tonight, I claim you before the world. No more hiding. No more pretending you are anything less than my queen. Seren's hand drifted to her belly, where a secret had been confirmed by the palace healer just 3 weeks ago. A child growing beneath her heart. Already 4 months along. She had been saving this revelation for tonight, for after the announcement, when she could finally tell him that their bond had already borne fruit. She had imagined his face when she told him, the way his amber eyes would soften, the way he would drop to his knees and press his lips to her stomach, as he had pressed them to every inch of her skin during the months of their hidden love. But something was wrong. Seren could feel it in the cold weight settling behind her ribs. Could see it in the rigid set of Corvin's shoulders, the mechanical way he moved across the dais. His eyes, usually burning with barely contained fire, seemed flat, distant, as if he were looking at the assembled crowd without truly seeing them. The bond mark on her shoulder ached with a dull, persistent throb. "My king." The High Chancellor stepped forward, his ancient voice carrying across the hushed assembly. "The realm awaits your declaration." Corvin's jaw tightened, a muscle feathered beneath his cheekbone. "Say it," Seren pleaded silently. "Say my name. Look for me in the crowd the way you always do, as if I am the only soul in any room that matters." But his gaze swept across the assembled nobles without pause, without recognition, without the faintest flicker of warmth. "I have gathered you here," Corvin said, and his voice sounded hollow, scraped raw, "to acknowledge a truth that can no longer be concealed." Seren's heart began to pound. A murmur rippled through the crowd as a door to the left of the dais swung open. A woman emerged, her crimson gown clinging to curves that seemed deliberately displayed, her dark hair cascading over bare shoulders like a river of ink. Vila of House Dravmont. Seren knew her by reputation. The daughter of the wealthiest merchant lord in Varanor, whose family had been scheming for a foothold in the royal court for 3 generations. Beautiful, calculating, ruthless in her pursuit of power. And she was walking toward the Alpha King with her hand resting on her stomach. "No. 6 months ago," Corvin continued, his voice devoid of emotion. "Before my coronation, I spent a night with Lady Vela. I have recently learned that night produced consequences." The throne room erupted in shocked whispers. Seren's legs nearly buckled. She caught herself on the pillar, her nails scraping against stone as the world tilted beneath her feet. "Lady Vila carries my heir," Corvin announced. "By the ancient laws of Varanor, I am honor-bound to take her as my queen." Vela's smile was a blade wrapped in silk. She ascended the dais steps and took her place beside the king, her hand sliding possessively over his arm. "I know this announcement is unexpected," Vela said, her voice carrying the false sweetness of poisoned honey. "But I am certain the people of Varanor will welcome the blessing we have been given, a child of royal blood, an heir to secure the kingdom's future." Seren could not breathe. The mark on her shoulder erupted with searing pain, as if someone had pressed a burning coal to her flesh. She bit down on her lip to keep from crying out, tasting copper, and feeling hot tears spill down her cheeks. This was not happening. This could not be happening. 3 nights ago, Corvin had held her face in his hands and sworn that she was his fate, his forever, his soul bound to hers by something older than law, or duty, or politics. Now he stood beside another woman, acknowledging another child, while Seren hid in the shadows with his true heir growing beneath her heart. She searched his face desperately, looking for any sign of the man she loved, any crack in the mask of cold indifference. For one heartbeat, his eyes flickered. Something moved in those wolf-bright depths, something that looked almost like pain, almost like confusion, almost like a man screaming behind glass, trapped in a body that no longer obeyed his commands. Then Viola leaned close and whispered something in his ear, and the flicker vanished. Corvin raised Viola's hand to his lips in the traditional gesture of acceptance. The crowd roared with approval, and Seren felt something inside her chest collapse into ruins. She ran. The servants' corridors swallowed her, narrow and dark and blessedly empty. Every step sent agony radiating from the mark on her shoulder, as if the bond itself was being ripped from her flesh. She did not stop until she reached the tiny chamber she had been given when she first arrived at the palace as a healer's apprentice, before Corvin had found her, before everything had changed. She collapsed against the closed door, her body shaking with sobs she could no longer contain. A mistress. A pregnant mistress. The laws of Varanor were clear. A child conceived before an official mating took precedence in the line of succession. If Vela truly carried the king's heir, no power in the realm could prevent her from claiming the throne at his side. But how? When? Seren's mind raced through the timeline. 6 months ago, Corvin had barely known Vila existed. He had told Seren himself that House Dravmont's endless attempts to place their daughter in his path had been nothing but a source of irritation. "I have never wanted anyone but you," he had promised. "From the moment I caught your scent in the healing ward, my wolf knew. You are my true mate, Seren. Nothing will ever change that." Had it all been lies? Her hand pressed against her stomach, against the tiny life that had felt like a miracle, and now felt like a curse. She could not stay here, could not remain in this palace where every stone would remind her of whispered promises and stolen kisses. Could not watch Vela grow round with the child that should have been hers, could not witness the coronation of a queen wearing the crown that Corvin had sworn to place on Seren's head. With trembling hands she began to pack. A worn cloak, a pouch of herbs, the silver pendant her mother had left her before the fever took her. Everything she owned fit into a single bag. She paused at the window, looking out at the celebration bonfires being lit across the capital. Somewhere in that palace, Corvin was accepting congratulations for his wise and honorable choice. Vela was probably already measuring the royal chambers for new furnishings. Seren pressed her palm to the frosted glass. "I loved you," she whispered to the night. "I would have given you everything." She did not see the shadow that moved in the corridor outside her door. She did not see the way the torchlight caught a pair of molten gold eyes, wide with sudden horror, as if a man had just woken from a nightmare to find himself standing in hell. And she did not hear the anguished howl that tore through the palace moments after she slipped through the servants' gate, a sound so raw and broken that every wolf in Varanor lifted their head in shared grief. By the time Corvin reached her empty chamber, his hands shaking and his mind finally clear, Seren was already gone. The only trace she left behind was a single silver pendant, caught on the windowsill where she had said her silent goodbye. He fell to his knees and clutched it to his chest, and for the first time since his father's death, the Alpha King of Varanor wept. 4 months crawled past like wounded animals. Seren had chosen the village of Hearthvale precisely because no one would think to look for her there. Nestled in a forgotten valley 3 kingdoms away from Varanor, it was the kind of place that existed on no important maps, sustained by sheep farming and the stubbornness of people who had learned to survive without the notice of kings. She arrived in the dead of winter, a young widow fleeing grief. That was the story she told, and the villagers accepted it without question. They had seen enough tragedy in their own lives to recognize it in others. The abandoned cottage at the edge of the forest became her home. In exchange for her healing skills, the village elders asked nothing more than her presence when sickness came calling. And so Seren became Sarah, the healer woman with sad eyes and gentle hands, who never spoke of her past and never received letters from anyone. But the nights were harder than the days. She would lie awake with her palms pressed to the growing swell of her belly, feeling movements that grew stronger with each passing week. Sometimes the baby kicked so fiercely that she could see the impression of tiny feet against her skin. And sometimes, in the hollow hours before dawn, she could swear she felt something else entirely. A presence, vast and searching, pressing against the edges of her consciousness. A desperate longing that did not belong to her, bleeding through a connection that should have been severed the moment Corvin chose another. The bond mark on her shoulder had never faded. That was the detail that haunted her most. Among wolf kind, rejection was supposed to sever a mate bond completely. The mark should have disappeared within weeks, leaving nothing but smooth skin and bitter memories. Instead, it burned. Every night, the same dull heat pulsed through the scarred tissue. Every morning, she would check the mirror and find it darker than before, as if the bond was strengthening rather than dying. It made no sense, unless the bond had never truly been broken at all. Seren pushed the thought away each time it surfaced. False hope was a poison she could not afford to drink. Mistress Sarah? The voice at her door belonged to young Bram, the miller's son, using the name she had given when she arrived. She set aside the dried chamomile she had been sorting and moved to answer. The boy's face was flushed with excitement and cold. Traders have come through the northern pass. They bring news from the great kingdoms. Seren's heart seized. What news? Strange things, mistress. Terrible things. Bram's eyes were wide. They say the Alpha King of Varanor has gone mad. The world tilted beneath Seren's feet. Mad? She heard herself whisper. Bram nodded vigorously. He has torn his kingdom apart searching for someone. A woman. No one knows who she is or what she did, only that the king will destroy anything that stands between him and finding her. The traders say whole villages have been questioned. Every healer in 3 kingdoms has been summoned and interrogated. Every healer. Seren's hand moved instinctively to her belly. The baby stirred, as if responding to the sudden spike of her pulse. There is more, Bram continued, dropping his voice as if sharing a secret. They say the queen, the Lady Vela, has grown desperate. Her child was born 3 months after the announcement, right on schedule for her claimed timeline, but the king refuses to acknowledge it. He has not visited the nursery even once. The nobles whisper that he does not believe the child is truly his. Something cracked in Seren's chest, something that felt dangerously like hope. The traders also speak of a reward, Bram added. 15,000 gold pieces for any information about a woman with pale hair and a healer's mark. The king's men have been showing a pendant to everyone they question. A silver pendant shaped like a crescent moon. Her mother's pendant, the one she had left behind. Seren pressed her hand to the doorframe to steady herself. Thank you, Bram. Please tell your father I will have his wife's tonic ready by evening. She closed the door with numb fingers and sank into the nearest chair. He was searching for her. Why would Corvin search for a woman he had publicly discarded? Why would he tear 3 kingdoms apart for a lover he had replaced with another? Why would he carry her mother's pendant and show it to strangers? Unless something had been wrong that night. Unless the emptiness in his eyes had been something other than rejection. A knock thundered against her door. Seren jerked upright, her pulse spiking. Bram had only just left. Who else would... She peered through the crack in the shutters and felt her blood turn to ice. 3 men stood on her threshold. 2 were clearly warriors, their massive frames and predatory stillness marking them as something far more dangerous than traveling merchants. But it was the third figure that seized her attention. A woman, cloaked in black, her face hidden beneath a deep hood. "We know you are inside, Seren of Varanor," the woman called out. "We have been sent to deliver a message." The baby kicked sharply against Seren's ribs. She grabbed the iron poker from beside the hearth and pressed her back to the wall. "I do not know anyone by that name." "Then I suppose you will not care to hear what has become of your precious Alpha King." The woman's voice dripped with malice. "How he has refused to touch his queen since the night of the announcement. How he screams your name in his sleep. How he is slowly losing his mind because the bond he shares with you was never meant to be broken." Seren's grip on the poker tightened. "Who are you?" The hood fell back, revealing features that were coldly beautiful and deeply familiar. "My name is Thessaly Dravmont," the woman said. "Vela is my sister. And I have come to ensure that you never return to Varanor alive." The first arrow punched through the shutters before Seren could draw breath to scream. She dove to the side as glass exploded across the floor, rolling behind the heavy oak table as a second arrow embedded itself in the wood inches from her face. The two warriors had shifted mid-stride, their human forms dissolving into massive wolves that crashed through her door with splintering force. Seren scrambled toward the back of the cottage, her heart pounding against her ribs. The wolves were between her and the front exit. The windows were too small to climb through. She was trapped. The first wolf lunged. Instinct took over. Seren thrust the iron poker forward, catching the beast across the muzzle. It yelped and recoiled, giving her precious seconds to dart towards the root cellar. She wrenched open the trapdoor and dropped into darkness, pulling it shut above her just as claws scraped against wood. The cellar was cold and damp and offered no escape, but it would buy her time. A few minutes, perhaps, before they broke through or smoked her out. Her hands pressed against her belly, where the baby had gone terrifyingly still. "I am so sorry," she whispered into the darkness. "I should have run farther. I should have hidden better. I should have—" A howl split the night. Not from the wolves above her. This sound came from the forest, from somewhere close, and it carried a note of savage fury that made the ground itself seem to tremble. The scratching at the cellar door stopped. Seren heard snarling, yelps of pain, the sickening crunch of bone and the wet tearing of flesh. Thessaly screaming commands that dissolved into a shriek of terror, then a gurgling silence, then nothing. She pressed her hand over her mouth, barely daring to breathe. Heavy footsteps crossed the floor above her. The trapdoor groaned as something tested its weight. "Seren." The voice reached through the wood, through the darkness, through 4 months of grief and longing and shattered dreams. She would have known it anywhere. "Seren, please, I know you are there. I can feel you through the bond." A ragged breath. "I have been searching for you every moment of every day since you vanished. I have torn apart everything I built trying to find you. Please, please let me see you." Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely grip the latch. She pushed the trapdoor open and climbed into the ruins of her cottage. Corvin stood amid the wreckage, blood dripping from wounds that were already healing, his chest heaving with exertion. Behind him, through the shattered doorway, she could see the twisted bodies of the wolves who had tried to kill her. And beyond them, crumpled in the mud, lay Thessaly Dravmont, her throat torn out, her scheming eyes staring sightlessly at the winter sky. But Seren's eyes found only him. He looked like a man who had not slept in months. Dark hollows bruised the skin beneath his eyes. His cheekbones stood out too sharply beneath flesh that seemed stretched thin with suffering. His hair, usually immaculate, hung in tangled disarray. And his eyes, those amber eyes that had haunted her dreams, burned with an intensity that stole her breath. "You found me?" she whispered. Corvin made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. He reached toward her, then stopped, his hand trembling in the air between them. "I was never going to stop looking." His words faltered on the emotion behind them. Not until I drew my last breath. Not until... His gaze dropped to her swollen belly. Every trace of color drained from his face. Seren. Her name was barely a breath. Is that... Are you... She pressed her palm protectively against the curve of her stomach. 4 months along when I left. Almost 8 now. Corvin's knees buckled. The Alpha King of Varanor, the most powerful wolf in 3 kingdoms, collapsed to the floor of her ruined cottage and pressed his forehead to her belly, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I did not know, he gasped against her dress. I swear to you, Seren, I did not know. I could never have. The baby kicked against his cheek. Corvin made a broken sound and pressed closer, his hands hovering around her as if she were made of glass, as if she might shatter or vanish if he held too tight. I am so sorry, he whispered. I am so sorry for everything. For what you saw that night. For what you must have felt. For every moment you spent believing I had betrayed you. The mark on Seren's shoulder flared with heat. And against every instinct screaming at her to maintain the walls she had built, she felt her fingers slide into his hair. You need to explain. Seren's voice came out harder than she intended. She stepped back from Corvin's embrace, her arms wrapping protectively around her belly, and watched him flinch as if she had struck him. Good. Let him flinch. 4 months of agony. 4 months of believing every whispered promise had been a lie. 4 months of crying herself to sleep while his child grew inside her, and his mistress wore a crown that should have been hers. He did not get to simply appear and expect forgiveness. Corvin rose slowly from his knees, his movements careful, as if he understood that one wrong word would send her running again. The night of the announcement, he began, his voice ragged. I remember none of it. Seren's jaw tightened. Convenient. I know how that sounds. He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. But I swear to you, Seren, the last thing I remember clearly is dressing for the ceremony. I was going to announce you as my mate. I had the words prepared. I had rehearsed them 100 times. And yet, you announced Vela instead. Because someone ensured I would. The bitterness in his voice was sharp enough to cut. When I woke 3 days later, I was in the royal chambers with Vila beside me, and she was already calling herself queen. I had no memory of the ceremony, no memory of accepting her claim, no memory of anything except fragments. Like watching my own body move through fog. The parallel to his behavior that night struck her like a blow. The mechanical movements, the flat, empty eyes. Drugged, she whispered. Corvin nodded grimly. Tiernan, my beta, has spent the past 4 months investigating. We believe it was a compound derived from Moon's Bane mixed with other suppressants. It severed my connection to my wolf, my instincts, and my bond with you. His hand moved to his chest, pressing against his heart. Everything that made me who I am was simply... gone. Seren wanted to disbelieve him, wanted to cling to the anger that had kept her functioning through the darkest days. But she remembered the flicker in his eyes during the announcement, that momentary crack in the emptiness, like a man drowning behind his own face. The pregnancy, she said. Vela's child. Corvin's expression hardened to stone. I have never touched her. Not once. Not willingly. And not while drugged. The healers who examined the child found traces of a glamour woven into its features. The boy shares no blood with me. Then whose? Her lover's. A minor lord from House Dravmont's holdings, who has since conveniently disappeared. Corvin's hands clenched into fists. The entire scheme was orchestrated by her family. They have been planning this for years. Positioning Vila, gathering the compounds needed to incapacitate me, forging documents to support her claim, all to place a Dravmont heir on the throne of Varanor. The scope of the conspiracy stole Seren's breath. This was not a crime of passion. This was a calculated destruction of everything she and Corvin had built. You believe me? Corvin's voice was raw with desperate hope. I can feel it through the bond. You are not certain, but you want to believe. Seren turned away, pressing her hand to the ruined window frame. The night air bit at her cheeks, carrying the scent of pine and distant snow. I watched you kiss her hand, she said quietly. I watched you stand before our people and declare her your queen, while I hid in the shadows like something shameful. Do you have any idea what that felt like? Yes. The word was barely a whisper. She turned back to find Corvin's eyes glistening in the moonlight. I know exactly what it felt like, he said, because I have lived with the knowledge of it every day since I regained my senses. Every time I close my eyes, I see you watching from that pillar. I see your face as I spoke those words. I feel your heart breaking through a bond I could not even access. His voice broke on the final word. You asked me once what my greatest fear was. Do you remember? Seren remembered. A whispered conversation in the darkness of his chambers, tangled together in sheets that smelled of cedar and moonlight. Losing control, she said. You said you feared losing control. The Dravmonts took that from me. The words were edged with barely contained rage. They took my will. They took my voice. They took the moment that should have been ours and twisted it into a weapon against everything I love. He closed the distance between them in 2 strides, his hands catching her face with desperate gentleness. But they did not take this. His thumb traced the bond mark through the fabric of her dress. They could not. I felt you, Seren. Every night of these 4 months, I felt you through a bond they tried to sever but could not destroy. It was the only thing that kept me from losing myself entirely. The heat from his palms seeped into her skin, warming places that had been cold for so long she had forgotten they existed. The dreams, she heard herself say. You came to me in dreams. Corvin's breath caught. You felt them too? Every night, you would find me in my chamber, in my cottage, wherever I was sleeping. You would speak to me in words I somehow understood. You would tell me that I loved you, his forehead pressed against hers, that I was coming for you, that nothing in any realm would keep me from finding my way back to you. Serene's eyes burned with tears she had forbidden herself to shed. I thought I was going mad, she whispered. I thought my mind was conjuring you because my heart could not accept that you were truly gone. My wolf was reaching for you. Even suppressed, even damaged, he never stopped trying to find his mate. Corvin's voice dropped to something rough and reverent. You are not mad, Seren. You are everything. You have always been everything. The baby kicked, hard enough that his hands felt it through her belly. Corvin's expression shattered into something raw and wondering. Our child, he breathed. You have been carrying our child alone, believing I had abandoned you, and still I loved you. The confession tore from Seren's throat before she could stop it. I tried to hate you. Every day I told myself that what we had was a lie, that you had used me and discarded me, that the man I loved never truly existed. But I could not make myself believe it. Even at my lowest, even when the pain was unbearable, some part of me knew. Corvin made a sound like a man dying and being reborn in the same breath. When he kissed her, it felt like coming home. His lips moved against hers with desperate tenderness, pouring 4 months of longing and grief and hope into a single point of contact. Seren felt the connection between them roar to life, flooding her with sensations that were not entirely her own. His love, vast and consuming. His terror at nearly losing her. His fierce, protective need to keep her safe. And beneath it all, a question pulsing through like a heartbeat. Will you come back to me? She answered without words, her fingers curling into his shirt, pulling him closer. When they finally broke apart, both trembling, Corvin kissed her forehead, then each of her closed eyelids, then the corners of her mouth. "Come home," he murmured against her skin. "Let me make this right. Let me give you the life I promised." Seren opened her eyes and saw the ruined cottage around them, the shattered windows, the bloodstains on the floor, the bodies of the wolves who had come to kill her on Vila's orders. "The Dravmonts will not simply let me return," she said quietly. "They sent assassins tonight. They will send more." Corvin's expression hardened into something lethal. "Then the Dravmonts will learn what happens to those who threaten my mate and my child." He cradled her face in his hands. "I have an army waiting for my command, Seren. 3,000 wolves who have watched their king slowly descend into madness and would tear apart the world to see him whole again. Vila's family has no idea what is coming for them." The mark on her shoulder pulsed with warmth. And for the first time in 4 months, Seren allowed herself to believe that the nightmare might finally be ending. "Together?" she asked. Corvin pressed his palm to her belly, feeling the child shift beneath his touch. "Together," he vowed. "From this moment until the stars burn out. I will never let you go again." Outside the ruined cottage, wolves began to emerge from the tree line, dozens of them, their eyes gleaming with fierce loyalty in the moonlight. Corvin's army had arrived, and with them, the beginning of a war that would either destroy the Dravmonts forever or burn Varanor to ashes. The journey to Varanor should have taken 5 days. Corvin's wolves made it in 2. Seren rode before the Alpha King on his massive black destrier, his arm wrapped securely around her waist, his chest a wall of warmth against her back. She had protested at first, insisting she could ride her own mount, but Corvin had simply lifted her onto his saddle and silenced her objections with a look that brooked no argument. "My wolf has been separated from you for 4 months," he had said, his voice rough with emotion. "He will not tolerate even 10 feet of distance, not yet. Perhaps not ever again." So Seren had relented, allowing herself to lean into his embrace as the miles disappeared beneath thundering hooves. As they rode through the second night, Corvin told her everything. He told her about waking from the drugged haze to find Vela in his chambers, her hands already reaching for him, her voice dripping with false sweetness as she spoke of their wedding plans. About the revulsion that had flooded through him, the primal rejection that his wolf had screamed even before his mind fully understood what had happened. He told her about throwing Vela from his rooms and summoning Tiernan, demanding answers that no one could provide. About the creeping horror as he pieced together fragments of the ceremony from witness accounts, realizing that something catastrophic had occurred while he was trapped inside his own unresponsive body. He told her about finding her chamber empty, about falling to his knees amid the scattered remnants of her hasty departure, about pressing her mother's pendant to his lips and howling until his throat bled. "I sent wolves to every corner of the realm within the hour," he murmured against her hair. "But you had vanished completely. No trail, no witnesses. It was as if the earth itself had swallowed you." Seren's hand found his where it rested on her belly. "I traveled only at night, stayed off the main roads, used a different name at every village. You were protecting our child?" Pride and anguish wove through his voice. "Even believing I had betrayed you, you were keeping our baby safe." "I would have done anything for this child." She turned her head to meet his gaze. "I still will." Corvin pressed his lips to her temple. "You will never have to protect our family alone again. I swear it on my blood and my bond." The baby stirred beneath their joined hands as if sealing the vow. As dawn painted the sky in shades of amber and rose, the spires of Varanor emerged on the horizon. The capital city spread across the valley below, its ancient walls gleaming in the early light. But something was terribly wrong. Smoke rose from the merchant quarter. The great banner above the palace gates, which should have displayed the royal crest of Varanor, had been replaced by a serpent coiled around a bleeding heart, the sigil of House Dravmont. No. Tiernan's voice was sharp with disbelief. The beta had ridden alongside them through the night, his silver-streaked fur now returned to human form. They would not dare. Corvin's arm tightened around Seren as a growl built in his chest. They have taken the palace. How is that possible? Seren demanded. You have been gone only 2 days. The Dravmonts have been planning this coup for years. Vila's pregnancy was merely the first step. Corvin's voice had gone cold, lethal. They needed me gone from the capital long enough to make their move. My search for you gave them exactly that opportunity. A rider burst from the city gates, galloping toward them at reckless speed. One of Corvin's scouts, her face ashen with terror. My king. She barely managed to halt her horse before the words tumbled out. The Dravmonts struck at midnight. They had allies within the palace guard. Lord Dravmont has declared himself regent, claiming you have gone feral and are unfit to rule. A snarl tore from Corvin's throat, more wolf than man. There is more. The scout's voice trembled. Lady Vela has ordered the arrest of anyone suspected of loyalty to the true crown. They have taken hostages. 43 servants and guards who refused to bend the knee. They are to be executed at sundown as traitors to the realm. Seren felt the blood drain from her face. Including the old healer who served in the palace infirmary. The scout continued, the one called Mirella, who trained the Lady Seren before her disappearance. Mirella. The name struck Seren like a physical blow. Mirella, who had taught her everything she knew about healing, who had covered for her absences when she slipped away to meet Corvin in secret, who had pressed a bundle of dried herbs into her hands the night she fled, whispering, "For the sickness that comes with new life. Be safe, little one." Mirella had known about the pregnancy, had helped her escape, and now she would die for that kindness. We have to save them, Seren said fiercely, already calculating the hours until sundown. We cannot let 43 innocent people die because they stayed loyal to you. Corvin looked down at her, his expression torn between the desperate need to protect her and the knowledge that she was right. Seren, you cannot enter that city. If the Dravmonts capture you. If we do nothing, Mirella dies. All of them die. She met his amber gaze without flinching. I will not hide while others are slaughtered in my place. I will not have their blood on my hands. For a long moment the Alpha King was silent. Then slowly a smile spread across his face. Something fierce. Something proud. Something that made Seren's heart stutter in her chest. My queen, he murmured. Even now, with assassins hunting you and our child growing beneath your heart, you think of others before yourself. He turned to address the army of wolves assembled behind them. Hundreds of warriors in human and animal form, their eyes gleaming with barely restrained fury. The Dravmonts believe they have won, Corvin announced, his voice carrying across the gathered forces. They believe their treachery has succeeded, that their false regent sits secure upon a stolen throne while their puppet queen awaits her coronation. His hand pressed against Seren's belly, feeling the child shift within. They are wrong. A howl rose from the assembled wolves, hundreds of voices joining in a chorus of righteous rage. Today, we take back what is ours. Today, we show the traitors what happens to those who threaten our king, our true queen, and the heir she carries. Today, House Dravmont learns the price of their betrayal. The army surged forward, a tide of fur and fang and vengeance, and at its head, with his mate held close against his heart, the Alpha King of Varanor rode to war. The battle for the outer walls was brutal but brief. The Dravmonts had expected resistance. They had not expected 3,000 wolves driven by 4 months of watching their king descend into madness, desperate to see him whole again. Seren watched from a protected position on the hillside as Corvin led the charge. Even from this distance she could feel his fury through the bond, a blazing inferno that scorched through her veins. His wolf form was magnificent and terrible, a shadow of death that tore through the Dravmont defenders like parchment. Within an hour, the outer gates had fallen. Within 2, the palace courtyard was secured. But as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, a messenger came running with news that turned Seren's blood to ice. "My lady." The young wolf could barely catch his breath. "Lord Dravmont has barricaded himself in the throne room with the hostages. He says if the king does not surrender and submit to execution, he will kill them all. Starting with the old healer." Seren was moving before she consciously decided to, ignoring the protests of the guards Corvin had left to protect her. "My lady, please." The king commanded. "The king can command me when 43 lives are not hanging in the balance." Her body ached from 2 days of hard riding. Her back screamed with the strain of carrying a child that seemed to grow heavier with each passing hour, but none of that mattered. She had to reach the throne room. The palace corridors were chaos. Bodies of fallen wolves littered the marble floors. The scent of blood hung thick in the air, mingling with smoke from fires that still smoldered in the eastern wing. Seren pushed through it all, following the pull of the bond toward where she knew Corvin would be. She found him at the great doors of the throne room, held back by Tiernan and 4 of his strongest warriors. "You cannot go in there," the beta was saying. "It is exactly what Dravmont wants. The moment you step through those doors, his archers will cut you down. And if I do nothing, innocent people die." Corvin's voice was ragged with barely contained violence. "People who stayed loyal to me. People who refused to kneel to traitors." "Corvin!" He spun at the sound of her voice, his expression cycling through relief and terror and fury in rapid succession. "Seren, what are you doing here? I told you to stay." "I know what you told me." She stopped before him, tilting her chin up to meet his blazing eyes. "And I am telling you that I will not hide while others die in my place. This is not your fight. It became my fight the moment Viola decided I was an obstacle to her ambitions." Seren placed her palm against his chest, feeling his heart thunder beneath her touch. "And it became my fight the moment I fell in love with you, the moment I chose you as my mate. Even knowing the cost. I will not let that love make me a coward now." Corvin's breath caught. The thread connecting their souls pulsed with something raw and overwhelming. Before he could respond, Seren turned toward the throne room doors. "Lord Dravmont!" she called out, her voice steady despite the terror coursing through her veins. "My name is Seren. I am the woman your family has tried so hard to destroy. I am the one carrying the true heir to Varanor." Silence from beyond the doors, then Viola's voice, sharp with malice. "The little healer crawls back at last. How touching. I am offering myself in exchange for the hostages." Seren kept her hands visible, her posture unthreatening. "Release them, and I will surrender to you willingly. You will have the one thing that threatens your claim to the throne." "Seren, no." Corvin grabbed her arm. "I will not let you." She looked back at him, and something passed between them through the bond. Not words, but understanding, trust, and beneath it all, a desperate prayer. "I am carrying your child," she said softly, for his ears alone. "Do you really think I would do anything to endanger our baby? Trust me, Corvin, please." His grip loosened. His jaw tightened with the effort of letting her go. The throne room doors swung open. Seren walked through them alone. The scene inside was worse than she had imagined. 43 hostages knelt in rows before the raised dais, their hands bound behind their backs, their faces pale with exhaustion and terror. Armed Dravmont soldiers stood behind them with blades drawn, positioned to execute on command. And on the throne that rightfully belonged to Corvin sat Lord Aldrich Dravmont, his silver hair gleaming beneath a stolen crown, his thin lips curved in a smile of cold triumph. Beside him, draped in crimson silk that matched the Dravmont banners now hanging from the walls, stood Vela. She looked different than Seren remembered. Harder. Her beauty had sharpened into something cruel, her eyes glittering with a hatred that seemed to consume her from within. "So this is the creature that has caused us so much trouble," Vila said, descending from the dais with predatory grace, "a common healer with delusions of grandeur. Tell me, did you really think a nobody like you could ever truly hold the heart of a king?" Seren's gaze found Morella among the hostages. The old healer's face was bruised, her silver hair matted with dried blood, but her eyes were fierce with warning. "Run," her expression seemed to say. "Run while you still can." But Seren was done running. "I came to offer a trade," she said, keeping her voice steady. "My life for theirs. Release the hostages, and I will not resist whatever punishment you deem fit." Lord Dravmont laughed, a cold sound that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. "You misunderstand your position, girl. You have no bargaining power here. The moment you walked through those doors, you became another hostage. Then you have no reason to keep the others." Seren took a step forward, her hand resting protectively on her belly. "You have what you want. The king's true mate and his legitimate heir, both at your mercy. Let the servants go. They are no threat to you." Vila's eyes dropped to Seren's swollen stomach, and something ugly twisted across her features. "His legitimate heir," she spat. "Do you have any idea what I sacrificed to put my son on that throne? The years of planning, the degradation of pretending to desire a man I despise, the agony of carrying another man's child and presenting it as the king's." She closed the distance between them until her face was inches from Seren's. "And then you appeared, a worthless healer with pretty eyes, and suddenly Corvin could see nothing else. Suddenly all my work, all my family's careful preparation, was threatened by a nobody who should have been cleaning chamber pots." "I never asked for his love," Seren said quietly. "The bond chose us, not the other way around." "The bond?" Vila's laugh was razor-edged. "That is what I will enjoy most about killing you. Feeling that precious bond shatter. Watching Corvin finally break beyond repair." She drew a dagger from her sleeve, the blade gleaming with an oily sheen that Seren recognized immediately. Moonsbane, the same compound they had used to drug Corvin on the night of the announcement. "I was going to make this quick," Vela murmured, pressing the blade against Seren's throat. "A single cut, and you would bleed out before anyone could save you. But I think I would like to take my time." The throne room doors exploded inward. Corvin burst through in full wolf form, a nightmare of black fur and blazing amber eyes, his jaws already seeking Vela's throat. But Dravmont soldiers intercepted him, 6 wolves against 1, buying their masters precious seconds. Lord Dravmont seized Seren from behind, his arm locked around her throat, Vela's poisoned blade now pressed to her belly. "One more step," he shouted at Corvin, "and I gut her like a fish, your mate and your heir dead before they hit the ground." Corvin's wolf form skidded to a halt, a snarl of pure anguish tearing from his throat. "Better." Dravmont's grip tightened. "Now shift back. Slowly. Any sudden movements and—" He never finished the sentence. Something was happening to Seren, something she could not control. The bond mark on her shoulder erupted with searing heat, more intense than anything she had ever felt. Pain radiated through her body in waves, but it was not the pain of injury. It was the pain of transformation. The baby. The baby's magic was responding to the threat against its mother, triggering the change that Seren had resisted since the night Corvin first bit her. She was becoming a wolf. Her bones began to crack and reform. Her skin rippled as fur pushed through from beneath. A scream tore from her throat, transforming mid-sound into a howl that shook the ancient stones. Lord Dravmont stumbled backward in shock, releasing his grip. The shift completed in an explosion of golden light. Where a pregnant woman had stood, a wolf now crouched. Her fur was the color of starlight, her eyes blazing with amber fire that matched her mate's. She was smaller than Corvin's massive form, but power radiated from her in waves that made the Dravmont soldiers whimper and back away. And somehow, impossibly, the child within her had survived the transformation, protected by the same magic that had triggered it. Seren's wolf lunged at Vila before the woman could react. Her jaws closed around the wrist that held the poisoned dagger, crunching through bone with savage satisfaction. Vela's scream pierced the air as the blade clattered to the floor. Corvin reached her side in 3 bounds, his black form pressing against her white, a perfect contrast of shadow and light. Together they turned toward Lord Dravmont. The would-be regent stumbled backward, his stolen crown tumbling from his head, his face slack with terror. "Mercy," he gasped. "I surrender. I—" Corvin's jaws closed around his throat. The crunch of vertebrae echoed through the sudden silence. Around the throne room, Dravmont soldiers were throwing down their weapons, falling to their knees in submission. The wolves, who had fought to protect Seren's entry, flooded through the shattered doors, securing every exit. Vila crawled toward the fallen dagger, her shattered wrist leaving a trail of blood across the marble floor. Seren intercepted her, one massive paw pinning the woman to the ground. Their eyes met. Wolf and woman. True queen and false. "Please," Vela whispered. "Please. I was only—" Seren shifted back to human form, standing over her fallen enemy with blood-matted starlight hair and eyes that held no mercy. "You drugged the man I love," she said quietly. "You tried to steal his throne, his child, his very will. You sent assassins to murder me in my bed. Your own sister died trying to finish what you started. And now you beg for mercy." Her hand found her belly, where the baby kicked strongly against her palm. "The mercy you showed me is the mercy you will receive." She looked to Corvin, who had also shifted back, standing amid the carnage like an avenging god. "She is yours to judge, my king." Corvin's expression was carved from granite as he stared down at the woman who had orchestrated so much suffering. Vela of House Dravmont," he pronounced, "for treason against the crown, attempted murder of the true queen, and conspiracy to corrupt the royal bloodline, you are sentenced to exile in the frozen reaches. Your name will be struck from all records. Your house will be dissolved. You will live out your days as the nothing you tried to make my mate believe she was." Vela's scream of fury echoed off the walls as guards dragged her away. Corvin crossed to Seren in 3 strides, his hands cupping her face with desperate gentleness. "You shifted," he breathed. "Pregnant, untrained, facing an enemy who should have killed you, and you shifted." Seren managed a weak smile. The baby was very motivated. "Our baby." His voice caught. "Seren, when Dravmont had that blade to your belly, I thought—" She silenced him with a kiss. Around them, wolves began to howl, a celebration of victory, of justice, of a true mate bond that had endured poison and politics and the darkest schemes of desperate enemies. When they finally broke apart, Seren's gaze found Morella among the freed hostages. The old healer was weeping with relief, supported by 2 young servants who had survived the ordeal beside her. "Go to her," Corvin murmured. "She kept your secret. She helped you escape when you needed to run. She has more than earned a moment with the queen she protected." Seren crossed the throne room on unsteady legs, exhaustion finally catching up to her now that the danger had passed. Morella opened her arms and Seren fell into them. "I knew you would come back," the old healer whispered. "I told them every day. I told them the true queen would return and set things right." "I almost did not," Seren admitted. "I almost stayed hidden forever. But you did not. Because you are stronger than you know, little one." Morella pulled back to cup Seren's face. "You always were." Behind them, Corvin was already issuing orders, securing the palace, sending messengers to the provinces with news of the Dravmont defeat, beginning the long work of rebuilding a kingdom that had been fractured by months of chaos. But his eyes kept finding Seren across the crowded throne room. And in those amber depths, she saw everything she had ever wanted: home. In the weeks that followed, Varanor began to heal. The Dravmont holdings were seized and distributed among the families who had suffered under their conspiracy. The soldiers who had participated in the coup were given a choice: exile or service in the border garrisons, far from the capital they had betrayed. Most chose the borders. A few chose to vanish into the wilderness, never to be seen again. Vela's journey to the frozen reaches was witnessed by thousands who lined the roads to watch her pass. She traveled in an iron cage, stripped of her fine gowns and jewels, her shattered wrist bound in rough bandages that would leave it forever crooked. The crowds did not throw stones or shout curses. They simply watched in silence, which was somehow worse. The child she had tried to pass off as the royal heir was quietly placed with a farming family in the southern provinces, far from the politics that had corrupted his birth. He would grow up knowing nothing of his mother's schemes, nothing of the throne she had tried to steal in his name. Some whispered it was more mercy than Vela deserved, but Corvin had made his judgment, and no one dared question the Alpha King, not anymore. The palace itself transformed under Seren's quiet influence. She refused the elaborate chambers that had once belonged to Vila, choosing instead a suite of rooms overlooking the healing gardens she had tended during her time as a palace servant. The windows faced east, catching the first light of dawn, and she would often sit there in the early hours with her hands on her swelling belly, watching the sun rise over the kingdom that would soon belong to her child. Their child. The bond between her and Corvin had grown stronger with each passing day, but it remained incomplete. The claiming marks they bore, his teeth on her shoulder, hers not yet given, pulsed with a constant awareness of each other. She could feel his emotions bleeding through at all hours, his joy when he saw her each morning, his worry when she pushed herself too hard, his overwhelming tenderness when he placed his hands on her belly and felt the baby kick against his palms, but they had agreed to wait. "When the kingdom is stable," Corvin had said, pressing his lips to her forehead, "when our enemies are defeated and our people are safe, then we will complete what we started. Then I will make you my queen in truth, before the gods and all the realm." Seren had agreed, though the delay chafed against something primal in her newly awakened wolf. The night of the completion ceremony arrived with the first full moon of spring. The great hall had been transformed. Where torches had once cast harsh shadows, now thousands of candles burned in holders of silver and crystal, their light soft and warm. Where the Dravmont banners had hung during the dark days of the coup, the true royal crest now flew, restored to its rightful place. And where Viola had once stood in her crimson gown, accepting a crown she had stolen through treachery, Seren walked in a dress of midnight blue, her starlight hair flowing loose around her shoulders, her belly round with the child who had survived so much to reach this moment. Corvin waited on the dais, dressed in ceremonial black and silver, his amber gaze never leaving her face as she approached. The High Elder, the same ancient wolf who had presided over the false choosing months ago, now spoke the true words of bonding. "Corvin, Alpha King of Varanor, blood of the first wolves. Do you claim this woman as your mate, your queen, your partner in all things until death releases you from your vow?" "I claim her." Corvin's voice rang clear through the hushed hall. "I have claimed her since the moment my wolf recognized her scent. I will claim her until my last breath and beyond." "Seren, healer of Varanor, bearer of the king's heir, do you claim this man as your mate, your king, your partner in all things until death releases you from your vow?" Seren's eyes met Corvin's. In their depths, she saw the reflection of every moment they had shared, the secret meetings, the whispered promises, the the devastating separation, the desperate search, the reunion that had nearly come too late. "I claim him," she said. "I have claimed him since the first time he looked at me and saw something worth loving. I will claim him until the stars themselves burn out." The elder nodded solemnly. "Then let the bond be completed. Let what was begun in shadow be sealed in light." Corvin stepped forward and tilted his head, baring his throat to her in the ancient gesture of submission. The most powerful wolf in 3 kingdoms, offering his vulnerability to his mate. Seren's wolf rose within her, guiding her movements as she pressed her lips to the place where his pulse thundered beneath his skin. She felt his anticipation bleeding through the bond, felt his desperate need for completion, felt the years of loneliness that had preceded her, and the months of agony that had nearly torn them apart. Her teeth sank into his flesh. The bond exploded between them like a sunrise after endless night. Seren gasped as Corvin's essence poured into her, merging with her own in ways she had never imagined possible. She felt everything he had ever felt for her. The moment he had first caught her scent in the healing ward and felt his world shift on its axis, the agony of the drugged ceremony, his wolf screaming in a cage of his own flesh, the desperate months of searching, following the thread of their bond through darkness and distance, and she felt him experiencing her memories in return. The terror of watching him choose another. The grief of believing herself abandoned. The fierce, protective love that had kept her fighting, kept her surviving, kept her hoping even when hope seemed foolish. When she finally released him, they were both trembling. The great hall had erupted in howls of celebration, but neither of them heard it. They stood locked in each other's gaze, the completed bond singing between them like a chord, struck on a harp of stars. "My queen," Corvin breathed. "My king," she answered. He kissed her then, in front of the assembled nobles and the cheering crowds, and the thousands of wolves who had fought to bring them to this moment. It was a kiss of promise and possession, of healing and homecoming, of 2 souls finally merged into one. 3 weeks later, in the soft light of a summer dawn, Seren gave birth to twins. A boy came first, his dark hair already thick on his tiny head, his cry strong and demanding. When the healers placed him in Corvin's arms, the Alpha King wept openly, his massive warrior's hands trembling as they cradled his son. "He has your stubbornness," Seren managed from the bed, exhausted but radiant. "I could feel it the entire time he was growing." Corvin laughed through his tears. "Good, he will need it to rule." Then the second child arrived, and the room fell silent with wonder. A girl, smaller than her brother, but no less fierce. Her first cry was not a wail but something closer to a howl, and when she opened her eyes, they blazed with amber fire that matched her father's. "She shifted," Morella whispered from her place beside the bed. "In the womb. That is why the birth was so difficult. This child carries power I have never seen before." Corvin took his daughter in his other arm, holding both children against his chest, his face slack with awe. "What will you name them?" Tiernan asked from the doorway, his voice rough with emotion. Seren reached for her children, and Corvin carefully transferred them to her waiting arms. The twins settled against her breast, their tiny fingers intertwining as if they had been holding hands their entire existence within her. "The boy will be Alder," she said softly. "For the tree that grows strongest after storms." Corvin nodded, his hand coming to rest on their son's head. "And the girl?" Seren looked down at her daughter, at the fierce amber eyes that stared back at her with unsettling awareness. "Luna," she whispered, "for the moon that guided her father to me through the darkest nights." Corvin made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. He climbed onto the bed beside her, careful not to jostle the children, and wrapped his arms around all 3 of them. "I do not deserve this," he murmured against her hair. "Any of this. You. Them. This second chance." Seren turned her head to meet his eyes. You fought for us. You tore apart your kingdom to find me. You never stopped believing, even when I had given up." She pressed her lips to his cheek. "You deserve everything, Corvin, and I will spend the rest of our lives making sure you know it." Outside their window, the wolves of Varanor lifted their voices in a chorus of joy. The song spread across the kingdom, from the capital to the smallest village, from the mountain peaks to the distant shores. Every wolf in the realm felt the pulse of the completed bond, felt the arrival of the twin heirs, felt the rightness of a story that had finally reached its proper ending. And in the great tapestry of Varanor's history, a new chapter was woven. The tale of a healer who became a queen, of an alpha king who defied poison and politics and madness itself to reclaim his true mate, of a love that could not be broken by conspiracy or separation, or even the cruelest manipulations of jealous enemies. They had found each other against impossible odds. They had built a family from the ashes of betrayal, and they would never be parted again. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story.